What you see along the wagon road is women who were every bit a force, as well as
Hmm.
the men who were driving the wagons. And a lot of times the women are driving the wagons. And so women
Hmm.
are all through this book.
Hmm.
I love that element of it.
The past isn't silent, it's buried. Welcome to Hidden Heroines of History. I'm your host, Gayvin Powers, a published author, award winning screenwriter, and storyteller who brings women's history to life.
Jim Dodson is editor of the award-winning Pine Straw magazine in Southern Pines, North Carolina, the arts and cultural magazine of the Carolina Sandhills. He is also the founding editor of O. Henry Magazine, arts and culture sister publication in Greensboro, and Salt Magazine in Wilmington. Upon the acquisition of Business North Carolina Magazine in early 2015 by Old North State Magazines, Dodson was named contributing editor at large. He's critically acclaimed, and best-selling books include Final Rounds, Faithful Travelers, The Dew Sweepers, Beautiful Madness, The Road to Somewhere, A Golfer's Life with Arnold Palmer, Ben Hogan, An American Life, which won the Herbert Warren Wind USGA International Book Award for 2024. His current book, The Road That Made America, is an epic account of one of the greatest untold stories in our nation's history, the 800-mile-long Great Wagon Road that the 18th century American settlers forged from Philadelphia all the way to Georgia, that expanded this country dramatically in the decades before we ventured west. The book also features Emma Tate, Jim's great-grandmother, a natural healer on Buckhorn Road. As a baby, she was found and adopted by George Washington Tate, Jim's double great-grandfather, on one of his gospel rides. Jim used to be my editor when I was a writer at Pine Straw Magazine, and I love Jim. He is our first man to be featured on this podcast, and I'm really excited. So let's go ahead and welcome Jim. Welcome, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Gavin, your old friend of you. It's nice to see your shining face.
It's nice to see you too. And of course, I had to have you on. You're my first editor. I love you so much. I love your wife, Wendy, and you're our first man on this podcast.
Well, I feel very honored. I hope I don't embarrass manhood
You
across
won't.
the planet.
I was very selective when I chose which man was going to come
Good,
on.
good,
So
good.
we're going to be okay. And so today we're going to be talking about your book, The Road That Made America. And you have such amazing stories in there, and you have this wonderful inspiration with various women throughout it. So would you like to tell us a little bit about your book and why it's the most fun book that you've ever done?
That's great. The shorthand of it, Gavin, is that I dreamed of traveling the wagon road since I was 13 in
Wow.
1966. And I heard about it, and my dad, we were shooting mistletoe out of his double great grandfather's old abandoned house out in the woods near Chapel Hill. And on the way back, he started telling us about how our ancestors, the Scotch Irish, the English, and the Germans, all came down this thing called the Great Wagon
Mhm.
Road. And it's right in the beginning of the book. I have this little vignette where I tell that story. And my dad was an outdoorsman. My brother and I were Eagle Scouts. We went to Indian burial grounds and we haunted small towns, old towns where there were battlefields. And we traveled a lot in the wilderness. Took it for granted we could just travel this road. And I remember asking my dad, can we someday travel the Great Wagon Road? And he said, well, I'll give you the keys to the Buick and you do it someday. So that's really where it started. And that buried in my consciousness. And
Mhm.
after 16 books, I decided I'm 67 years old. I need to do this book now or never. So I did. And it was lost for 200 years
Wow.
until archivists and historians began to realize this was the most traveled road in America, that roughly anywhere from 170 to 200,000 Scotch, Irish, Germans, Lutherans, Moravians, Quakers came down that road to the south and then
Mhm.
hence to the west. So it really was the gateway road to the west of America. And so that was all in the mid 18th century. And so I always dreamed of finding it, and I got to the age where it's either do or die now, so I'm going to go do it. So I found it and followed it.
That's great. And I love the part in the story where you first go off, you have this boyish excitement. So I can feel that in the story. And I love that, and you're sharing this with the listeners right now about how this is a lifelong, exciting adventure that you've wanted to take. Although your father wasn't there, it was like having him there because you had the
Sure.
station wagon. And then you brought your wife with you, which I thought was wonderful. And she's got
Oh,
her
yeah.
Celtic intuition going, and she finds part of the road for you.
She did. We were looking for the traces of it. That was 2017 New Year, and we were at this on the Haw River, this historic river in North Carolina, and we had gone looking for traces of the grist mill that was my double great grandfather's grist mill, and it was long gone. They built an interstate bridge with 8 lanes, and windy indeed. I was like, God, it's all gone. I remember seeing this when I was a little kid. And she goes over through the brambles and she says, come over here. And I walk over and she shows me what looks like a mill race running down, still there after 220 years or something. How the interstate missed gobbling it up, I don't know, but it was right below the bridge. And it was a very wonderful moment. And I am married to a very spiritual and gifted woman who knows the importance of ancestors. And so that was a great moment.
It's at the beginning of the book. The other piece that I really love in the beginning, well, there's lots of pieces that I really love in the book, but I also love about how you talk about Emma Tate. And
God,
I've discovered in doing research for my own book is a lot of times to be able to find women in history, we've had to go into biographies of men or what have you. And so when I read the beginning of your story, it reminded me so much of my own experience of doing this research and about how you sort of had to dig a little bit, even in your own family, to find out about Emma. Would you like to share that with us?
I would. I would say that Emma Tate might be the reason I even did this book, because when we were on her home place, long abandoned, trees growing up through porches and wind is gone. This was a place my dad started telling my brother and I, and I'm 13, my brother's 15. This was the very most special place in his life he ever went to, because he would come every summer and stay with his grandmother, his father's mother, who he said, and he kind of casually dropped this, all along the road before Chapel Hill, between Hillsborough and Chapel Hill, she was a healer. And so she healed people all along that road. And he said he used to help her gather herbs and flowers and things for her homemade medicines. And I thought that was just fascinating. Of course, I was a kid when he's telling me this. Now, years later, I knew that natural healers, that was the pharmacy of natural healers. You know? And so he said this meant the world to him. And he was a man who had a very spiritual view, a very, what I would call, holistic, natural spirituality about nature, and they came from his Emma Tate, who then, so as I say in the section of your book you're talking about, kind of went over my head. And we look at the house and we talk and we shoot mistletoe out and we're walking back, and he said something like, the tragedy of Emma was that she hanged herself from a rafter of this house when her children are all gone. And I said, why would she do that? And he said, well, I always thought she was a woman with a foot in 2 different worlds. And it took me a few minutes, but I finally said, my brother couldn't have cared less. He was just ready to get in the car and go home. I said, what does that mean? And he said, well, there is a lot of anecdotal and belief in our family that Emma was a Native American woman. Your double great grandfather, George Washington Tate, came home. I didn't know this till later, and it's in the middle of the book. Came home from the Civil War. And he never mentioned his relationship with the Confederate Army again. Even though he ended up almost a general.
Oh my gosh.
He just buried. He was at Appomattox with Lee, and he was at Antietam and lost most of his army. His division, the North Carolina 16th, at Pickett's Charge at Gettysburg. 2 days before Appomattox, he took his uniform off, buried it, and came home and became a farmer and a painter, and never mentioned it again. And it was in a family of Methodists who were anti-war and anti-slavery. So no wonder he never mentioned it. So I said to my dad, so what's the story with Aunt Emma, as everybody called Aunt Emma? That she was a healer, she was beloved. And he said, the truth was your double great grandfather started Methodist churches, and he went on what he called gospel rides up to the western part of the state, which was still reeling from Andrew Jackson's removal of the Cherokee Indians, and the Catawba Indians had helped the Patriots, but they were decimated too. And and my dad explained to me, he brought back an infant girl who was probably an orphan and raised her with his 6 other children.
Wow.
And was kind of the apple of his eye. And she was clearly a Native American woman. I checked this with my father's cousin. He said, oh, no question about it. And then the beautiful part of this, as I say in the story, my father's great aunt cousins lived further down the road. They were antique women from the 19th century. They made their own clothes. They wore lace-up boots. They had a huge old farm. They lived in a log cabin with 2 light bulbs. I know I spent a night with them once. They had 2 outhouses. One had a moon on the door. The other had a star on the door. My dad called them the Star and Moon Girls. He grew up with them, Ida and Josie. And I asked them, probably 3 weeks later, we went down to take them. Every year we would take them Pond's Cold Cream, Reader's Digest, Life magazine, and sliced ham, country ham. And I remember I asked cousin Josie, who was the real talkative one, and Ida, she was the tough character, and Josie was the really sweet one. And I asked cousin Josie, as they called her, I said, was Aunt Emma an Indian? And she got very still, and she said, oh, yes, she was. All of us knew she was an Indian princess. She healed people. And she said she had, and she was very, it was a wonderful moment. And I never forgot it. And I thought someday I'm going to put that in a book. So I did in this book.
So you did in this one.
And Emma the mystery of Emma haunted this family because suicide in a Southern family in those days was considered a real black mark. No one ever talked about it. And so I'm not even sure it made any news or anything. They lived in the country. And her husband, Uncle Jimmy, who I'm named for, was a character. He played the fiddle at country dances. He drank a lot. He had horses, supposedly sold. When Stoneman's cavalry came through, he apparently sold horses to them and had them stolen back the next night. And he was a real character. But Emma was a real amazing picture. And here's the best part. Halfway through this book, my cousin Roger calls me up and he says, Jim, would you like to see a picture? I've just found a picture of Aunt Emma. And my golly, when you look at that picture, she is very Indian looking. She has the beautiful features of an Indian. And it's funny because my grandfather, her firstborn, looks exactly like Sitting Bull. And a story that's not in the book was when my grandfather was 77. He took him off to the Wild West show in Raleigh. It made one appearance, the Buffalo Bills touring Wild West show, hoping to see Sitting Bull. And I don't know if he did or not, but my dad said that was his great dream, was to meet Sitting Bull.
Wow.
And he looks just like Sitting Bull. So I'm pretty sure, in Aunt Emma, that whole story launched me down the wagon road. And I didn't know anything about, my double great grandfather, George Washington Tate, except he was named for George Washington. And I found out a ton about him. It's all a great surprise in the book. But also I learned about Aunt Emma, and she really is the spirit that pushed me down that road.
I love that. And it is so sad when you think about that and the suicide, and it's such a statement. Just going back to what you're saying, a woman who had a foot in both worlds, and it sounds like she had that from the get-go, and it sounded like she had those gifts from the get-go too, because if she was a baby when she was adopted, those gifts innately were with her to be able to do all of that, which is pretty incredible.
And the 4 or 5 elders of the family that I asked all told the same story. They said, absolutely. She was a woman who lived out of doors, who gathered herbs and made poultices and rustic medicines. And they were absolutely beyond doubt convinced. Now, even when I finally got hold of the family records, the Tate family records, of his 6 children, she was the only one that didn't have a definite birthday and a place, which further confirmed that she came to him. Yeah. And the interesting thing, I found out years later, I had a friend who did a deep dive into the family records and court stuff in that part of North Carolina. And apparently she ended up with, when she died, which was sad. And if you do a lot of reading with Native American people, you learn they didn't fear death at all. They saw it as a continuance of life. And that part of North Carolina, this part of North Carolina, was rapidly changing. I suspect that she just felt her grandchildren are all gone, grown up and gone. My dad was gone. He was her favorite child. He spent all of his summers at her farm with her. And I just suspect that she figured it's hard to know. Jimmy was apparently a very docile fellow. I mean, he was a fiddle player and drank a little bit, but the Dodsons were the most bland people I ever met. I mean, they weren't hellraisers at all. They were all Methodists. They were kind of soft Methodists. So I think Emma, whatever motivated her, she wasn't afraid of dying. She wasn't afraid of death. She saw it as most Indians did, a good day to die.
Mm-hmm.
But it still shocked the family's perceptions of things. And it really did set me on the road. I thought, I got to travel this wagon road and find out about where these Tates came from and what the Dodsons, how they met the Dodsons and how it all came together. So that's what it was really about.
And I love that, because so many of us have stories, and but how many of us can track it like you were able to track it along this road and then bring a bigger picture to it? Because this is a travel story, but it's also a memoir.
And a history book.
And a history book. I mean, there's so much history in this. We were talking earlier, and I can't even imagine how you edited this, because there's so much history laid into every sentence that this is a good book for people to read if they genuinely want to know about
The beginning
our
of
past.
America. Yeah.
Yeah, and America.
You know, it's funny you'd say that. So whenever I've done a lot of speaking on events at historical organizations up and down the Wagon Road in the last 9 months since the book came out, and I always say, I had to find my way to this book. 20 years ago, local archivists, local historians, curators began to they really wanted to know where the most used road of colonial America came from, where it ran. And so they pretty well found it. They ran from Philadelphia out to Lancaster, then to York, then out to what's Gettysburg by the mid 1600s, then out to what now is Chambersburg, Highway 11 through Hagerstown, Maryland, down through Western Virginia, the Valley of Virginia, into Western North Carolina, almost through here in Greensboro, and then down to South Carolina and across Western South Carolina, and then crossed into sort of Camden and ended in Augusta, Georgia. So I knew the road. So I thought, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just drive that road in 3 weeks. I even had the last true production station wagon that Detroit produced. I bought it in Southern Pines, which you are from very well. I found a woman that called me and said, Mr. Dodson, I'm here to make you a happy man. My dad has a 1996 Buick Grand Estate station wagon that he drove my mother supposedly to dinner, and they ended up 40 miles away, and she's terrified. And so we've taken the car away from him. I'll sell it to you for $3,000 if you'll get it in the next 2 days. So I bought it and drove. And Wendy said, what the hell's that in our parking lot? And I said, this is the car I'm going to drive down the wagon road in. I bought it 5 years before I set off down the road. And I finally did it, and I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'll drive the 828 miles of the Great Wagon Road and talk to historians and people, and it'll be a fun, breezy book. I wasn't even out of Lancaster County. I thought it would take me 3 months to do that. I wasn't even out of Lancaster County in a month. There was so much history. And I realized one of the patterns that you see with the people who traveled the Great Wagon Road, and it's estimated anywhere from 170 to 200,000 Scotch, Irish, Germans, Lutherans, Moravians, Quakers, Swiss, free Africans came down this road. And one of the things they almost all did, including Daniel Boone's family from Exeter, Pennsylvania, they would travel a third of the way there and stay for 6 months and reposition and then keep going. So I was an idiot to think I'm going to drive it in 3 weeks, right? So what I realized, and I say this in the book, I got to think Columbia, Pennsylvania, right on the corner of right above this wonderful woman who had this amazing house sitting on the Susquehanna River, the first giant house. And she was a Quaker feminist, and she was amazing. And I realized I have to do this. I have to find the people to tell me the story. So this book becomes not me writing the history, but these people I met who are in love with keeping the flame of this history alive. And that's what this book's about. And I think that's why I get a letter now, an email, and a few over traditional mail letters, but a lot of emails, almost 2 or 3 or 4 a week, from people who've discovered the book and say, oh my gosh, my family came down that road, or I loved this history I've never heard. And that's really the most gratifying thing of all, because I had no freaking idea how to write this book until I met these people.
It harks back to back in those days when people really were in wagons going on the road, they told oral histories. So it's very
They did.
much tapping into that oral history that would have been common
Yeah.
back then. And so that's how stories were passed down
Mhm,
back in those
mhm,
days.
mhm.
So that's a little bit more authentic, in my opinion, because you're
Well,
doing
it's kind of accidental, but it happened that
well.
way.
I mean,
You know, I
it
did
worked.
nothing. I had to work. I had to ask. I had to find people. I would go in these towns like Winchester, Virginia. Oh my God, Stanton, where Woodrow Wilson. By my count, 8 presidents were either born on or traveled the Great Wagon Road their whole careers.
That's amazing.
The most important battles of the French and Indian, Revolutionary, and Civil Wars all happened along it.
That's
I mean, to go
incredible.
to the Illumination at Antietam, I would tell your listeners, your fans, go do that. It's the first Saturday night of every December, and they put
Mhm.
23,000 luminaries out on this battlefield, and you can drive through it, and you'll see Boy Scouts with bonfires, and it's the most inspiring thing ever. And this is the
Wow.
bloodiest day in American history.
Oh my gosh.
Put it down on your calendar. Go next
Okay.
year. And I have a whole chapter on that. That was the discovery of this book. And it really reignited my love of American history. I never had a conversation in any negative way about modern politics. It was about their
Mhm.
love of their ancestors and how they came this way and they forged a place in the wilderness. And it really revived my love of America, I have to tell you.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing that up. That's actually what I love about this podcast too, because
Mm.
we don't talk modern politics. We just talk about history and we can speculate and we can
Yeah,
just find ways that we can
yeah,
all come
yeah.
together. And then how does this resonate still today? So that's one of the things that we talk about is
Hmm.
why are these people still important today? Why is this road still important today? Why is Emma Tate still important today? Why is Hannah Penn still important today? I love
Oh,
that
gosh.
section on Hannah Penn, the
Yeah,
second wife of William
yeah.
Penn, and just completely running his estates and fighting off other people who wanted his sons who wanted to
No,
squander
they were
the
corrupt as the day is long.
right. And she did it. You might have another book in you, Jim, whether you want to do it.
Well, I love Susie Wright. I mean, when I
Yeah.
found Susie Wright, this woman
Yeah.
who became the local, she basically sat and became a judge. She
Mhm.
warned them about vigilantes. She really was a Quaker woman who knew about science and arts, connected with Ben Franklin and all the members of the American Renaissance. She built the first beautiful house sitting on
Mhm.
in the wilderness, and it's still there. It's Wright's mansion. It sits in Columbia,
Mhm.
Pennsylvania, right below Lancaster, on the river, the Susquehanna River. Which, oh by the way, was a town. It had the name Columbia, and that town came within one vote in the U.S. Congress of being the national capital.
Oh, wow.
And George Washington wanted it to be there. Instead, they picked this foggy bottom place there on the Potomac where it has malarial fogs, and that's Washington D.C.
You also bring up a good point too, because it was right on the river. And I
Mhm.
didn't realize this until I started rowing the river when I lived in Chattanooga,
Mhm.
and that the roads were the river
Yeah,
way back
yeah,
when.
they were. That was how
And
it.
so the way the land looked, the way people
Yeah,
communicated with each other, the way the towns were, they were all along the rivers because the river was the way that you traveled. So I love that you mentioned that because I didn't realize that until then. And maybe people understand that now with Outlander because they see that on the river.
you see, I was just watching the later, whatever it is, the 7th or 8th season of Outlander,
Mhm.
which takes place here in North Carolina, and
Mhm.
I was struck by the construction of the houses. Susie Wright's house, it was going to be knocked down and used as a coal yard. And a
Wow.
man who loved history saved it. And then years later, 2 people who were very much involved with the preservation, early days of the preservation societies in America, saved it, bought it, and restored it. The architectural details of this house later became commonplace in
Mhm.
beautiful houses in America. And this woman, I mean, every bit of it came from the woods around this site, and Susie oversaw everything about the building of this house, and it really was extraordinary. I loved learning about her. I sat on her porch, and it had the kind of house that the front of it was open to the river because we get the river breezes. And then it had the woodworking in the house was handmade. Just when you think about what we could have lost in the preservation movement saved, I would tell people. And the other part of it, reason to go to Columbia, there's a thing there called the National Clock and Watch Museum is there. Oh my gosh, it is a wonderful place to disappear into for 2 hours. Oh my God, they have the first wristwatch ever made in that place.
Really?
They have all the Bond watches. My point is that it's a wonderful, I don't know why it started there. I think I have it in the book, but some guy who was a watch nut or a clock watch nut moved there in 1930, and he decided that he became a watchmaker, and he has built an extraordinary museum. And it's perfect because the way the museum's laid out, they start with Stonehenge, which was the first natural clock. And then when they get to America, they have the clocks that the pioneers made and the Irish clockmakers made that went across America. They have, it's just amazing. It tells the history of America through watches and clocks.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing.
You're also reminding me, did you ever hear the story about how George Washington's house was almost demolished as well?
Oh, yeah.
And they even asked, I believe it was Congress at the time, for money to save it because it was falling down. It was dilapidated. And Congress just said, we aren't in the business of doing up houses, saving houses. Exactly. And it was a couple of women that came in, and then they started a women's group, and they're still running it. It's a nonprofit now. Yeah. So are there any other stories that didn't make it into the book that you're just kind of a little heartbroken that didn't get in there that you think our readers would like to hear about?
When you look at the Wagon Road, the people who came down that road, and especially the Moravians. The Moravians were the quickest travelers of the Great Wagon Road when they came down to Winston-Salem and that part of the state. They were very much not only innovative in terms of building things and creating, they were Germans, but the female part of that culture was so strong that it really did influence a lot of what you see today in the modern about rights. They had very advanced rights. They had the Moravian women were a real force. They balanced out the male culture of Moravian life. And I saw it up and down. I saw it in a little town called Lidditz, up in Pennsylvania. And of course, what happened in this book was something I never saw. It became a very personal odyssey. A girl that I loved very much and grew up with and was going to get married to, was murdered when we were in college. And her name kept popping up along this road with this divine thing. And of course, the book ends with me finding her grave, which was just extraordinary. What you see along the Wagon Road is women who were every bit a force, as well as the men who were driving the wagons. And a lot of times the women are driving the wagons. And so women are all through this book. And I love that element of it. This book just absolutely refreshed my whole view of America.
It's pretty remarkable.
I think it's the reason I'm getting emails almost every day from across the country as 200 occurs. And I've already agreed to do a bunch of evenings up and down the Wagon Road to Philadelphia.
That's a great idea. Thank you so much for sharing that with our listeners today.
Oh, my honor. I love seeing you.
Thanks. I'm so happy to see you. Thank you so much for coming on and being able to share your story with our listeners and being able to see who I was fortunate enough to work with for years over at the magazine. And let's go ahead and let's toast. So I'm going to grab my drink.
All right.
And
this is Kentucky bourbon. It's not, there's no such thing as American bourbon, but I'll toast you with that.
That's true. That's true. Because it has to come from Kentucky. Yeah, exactly. To be considered actual bourbon. At the end of every podcast, we go ahead and toast. Is there anyone or any group of people you would like to dedicate this podcast to?
Oh my gosh. Our ancestors who were smarter than us in some ways. And we need to listen to their voices still.
Absolutely. And I'd like to go ahead and jump off of that and say also to our ancestors and to your Emma Tate, to your Wendy, to all the wonderful women who have been along the way and helped out. And hopefully we'll glean some good information from our ancestors and continue to live some better lives in the future.
Amen. God bless.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is Gayvin Powers and Jim Dodson. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this, like, share, and subscribe. We have more amazing episodes planned. You can listen to them on the Hidden Heroines of History podcast on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and iHeartRadio.